A man was attacked by a gang in broad daylight. His K-9 partner's move left everyone speechless. Detective Jake Lawson crouched behind the rusted dumpster, his heart pounding in his chest. Beside him, his loyal K-9 partner Shadow lay still, ears pricked and alert. The alley was silent except for the distant wail of sirens and the occasional skittering of rats. Jake peered around the dumpster, his hand resting on his holstered gun. He knew the risks of pursuing Vincent Viper Moreno alone, but he couldn't let the ruthless gang leader slip away again. Viper's reign of corruption and violence had terrorized the city for far too long. Someone had to take a stand. Shadow's ears suddenly flattened and a low growl rumbled in his throat. Jake tensed, knowing trouble was near. He reached out to calm the German shepherd. "Easy boy," he whispered. "We've got this." Footsteps crunched on the gravel behind them. Jake spun around to see Viper flanked by 4 heavily tattooed thugs, cruel smiles twisting their faces. They had planned this ambush well. Well, if it isn't the Boy Scout detective," Viper sneered. "You picked the wrong day to play the hero, Lawson." Jake rose slowly to his feet, keeping a restraining hand on Shadow. "It's over, Viper. I have all the evidence I need to put you and your whole crew away for a long time." Viper threw his head back and laughed. "You really think that matters? I own this city. The evidence won't ever see the inside of a courtroom." He nodded to his men. "Teach the good detective a lesson, boys. One he won't forget." The thugs advanced, brass knuckles glinting and steel-toed boots crunching. Jake shoved Shadow back and assumed a fighting stance. If this was how it had to go down, he wouldn't make it easy for them. The first blow caught Jake in the ribs, driving the breath from his lungs. He staggered but managed to block the next punch, returning it with a swift uppercut. Beside him, Shadow snarled and lunged, sinking his teeth into a thug's arm. But there were too many of them. Fists and boots slammed into Jake from all sides, beating him to the ground. Through swollen eyes, he saw Shadow being hurled aside by 2 of the men, yelping as he struck the brick wall. "Shadow, no!" Jake gasped, struggling to rise. A boot crashed into his jaw, snapping his head back. He collapsed into the grimy pavement, blood dripping from his mouth. Viper stepped forward, grabbing a fistful of Jake's hair and wrenching his head up. "I did warn you, Lawson. This is my city. You can't touch me here." He reached into his jacket and drew out a long, wicked knife. "Time to end our little game, Boy Scout. Any last words?" Jake glared up at him defiantly, refusing to give Viper the satisfaction of seeing his fear. "This isn't over, you son of a bitch. One day, you'll get what's coming to you." "Brave words," Viper chuckled, "but you won't be around to see it." He raised the knife and Jake braced himself for the end. Suddenly, a black blur struck Viper from the side, knocking him off balance. The knife clattered to the ground. It was Shadow, bloodied and limping. The indomitable K-9 had risen again, launching himself at Jake's attacker with his last strength. He clamped his powerful jaws around Viper's wrist, wrenching and twisting viciously. Viper screamed in pain and outrage, trying to shake the dog loose. The thugs stood frozen in shock, the savagery of Shadow's attack leaving them momentarily stunned. Jake wasted no time. Surging to his feet, he delivered a devastating kick to Viper's knee, feeling bone and cartilage shatter. As Viper crumpled, howling, Jake laid into the thugs with renewed fury, fists and elbows and knees flying. He fought like a man possessed, all pain forgotten. For his city, for his partner, for the chance to see justice done. And at his side, Shadow refused to yield, blood-flecked fangs bared in fierce determination. The fight was brief but brutal. By the time it was over, Viper and his thugs lay groaning and semi-conscious around the alley. Jake slumped against the wall, gasping for breath, his body screaming with pain. Shadow limped to his side and Jake gathered him into a fierce hug, tears filling his eyes. "Good boy," he rasped. "You saved my life, Shadow. You saved me." In the distance, sirens grew louder as Jake's backup finally arrived. He knew the scene looked bad. An off-duty cop and his K-9 beating down a gang leader. There would be difficult questions and an arduous investigation ahead. But Jake also knew this was a turning point. Viper's veneer of invincibility had been shattered in broad daylight. The people had witnessed one man and his dog standing up to the untouchable gang boss. And they had won. Word would spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the spark that ignited real change. The inspiration for others to find their courage too. Jake gripped Shadow tighter, ignoring his bruised ribs. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Viper had powerful friends, and his influence ran deep. But for the first time in years, Jake felt a flicker of hope amid the crushing despair that had enveloped his city. It wasn't much, the barest glimpse of light in the darkness. But it was a start. The news of Viper's beatdown spread quickly through the neighborhood, whispered and hushed, excited tones on street corners and in local shops. For the first time in memory, people spoke the gang leader's name without glancing over their shoulders in fear. Detective Jake Lawson was hailed as a hero, his bravery praised, his sacrifice honored. But it was Shadow who captured the public's imagination. The valiant K9 who had fearlessly launched himself at the armed gang leader to save his partner. Jake resisted the attention, insisting he was just doing his job. But even he couldn't deny the way the mood had shifted in the neighborhood. An unfamiliar energy thrumming in the air. People walked a little taller, their heads held a little higher. For once, they had seen one of their own stand up to the gangs and win. But Jake knew it was only the beginning. Viper would seek retribution, both legal and illicit. His gang would lash out, enraged and humiliated by their leader's defeat. The danger had never been greater. As he lay in his hospital bed, Shadow curled protectively at his feet. Jake made a silent vow. No matter the cost, no matter the risk, he would see this through. He would rid his city of Viper's corruption once and for all. For his neighbors, for his fallen comrades, and for the future they all deserved. The road ahead would be long and treacherous, but Jake was determined to walk it to the end. With Shadow at his side, he knew he would never walk alone. Vincent Viper Moreno was not a forgiving man. From his lavish penthouse, he glared out over the city, his wrist heavily bandaged, his shattered knee throbbing with pain. The humiliation of his defeat seared like acid in his veins. "I want Lawson destroyed," he hissed to his lieutenants. "Him and that damn dog. I want them both wiped off the face of the earth." The men shifted uneasily. They had all grown used to easy prey. Warring against a hard-case cop with nothing to lose was a different game entirely. "Boss, we gotta be smart about this," one ventured carefully. "Lawson's a hero now. If anything happens to him, it'll be an all-out war with the police. Maybe we should just lay low for a while." Viper slammed his fist on the table, making them all flinch. "Lay low?" he roared. "And let people think some washed-up detective and his mutt can take us down? We lay low now, we're finished. Every lowlife in the city will think they can challenge us." He leaned forward, eyes blazing. "No, we send a message. A message that no one messes with Vincent Moreno and lives. I don't care how many cops we have to go through. Lawson's a dead man walking." He jabbed a finger at his most trusted enforcer. "Riggs, put the word out. $500,000 to anyone who brings me Lawson's head. And another $100,000 for the dog's pelt. I want every lowlife, every junkie, every crooked cop in the city gunning for them." Riggs nodded, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Consider it done, boss." As the men filed out, Viper turned back to the window, hatred pulsing in his chest. They would all pay. Lawson, the dog, the whole damn city. He would teach them once again to fear the Viper's bite. Jake gritted his teeth as he eased himself into the passenger seat of the unmarked squad car, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through his battered body. Beside him, Sergeant Lena Alvarez shot him a look of concern. "You sure you're ready for this, Lawson?" she asked. "It's only been a week. No one would blame you for taking more time." Jake shook his head stubbornly. "Can't afford to wait. Viper's out for blood. The longer I'm out of action, the bolder he'll get." In the back seat, Shadow whined softly, sensing his partner's discomfort. Jake reached back to scratch his ears reassuringly. Lena sighed. "Well, you're no good to anyone dead. so at least take it easy, okay? We'll swing by the station first. See if the techs were able to pull anything from those surveillance cams near the alley. Jake nodded, then froze as a thought struck him. Damn it, I need to swing by Clara's first. Make sure she and her family are okay. With Viper gunning for me, they could be in danger. Clara Martinez was a former informant of Jake's, a one-time gang member who had gotten out with his help and now ran a small bakery. Her intel had been key to building the case against Viper. Lena frowned but didn't argue. She knew how much Jake's informants meant to him, especially the ones who had turned their lives around. Martinez's place first, then the station, she agreed. Let's roll. They were just pulling out onto the main road when the call came over the radio. All units, reports of shots fired at Martinez's bakery on 24th. Multiple casualties. Suspects wearing Los Vibores colors fleeing the scene. Jake's blood turned to ice. No, he whispered. No, no, no. He turned to Lena, desperation etched into every line of his face. Get us there now. The scene at Martinez's bakery was one of utter devastation. The front windows were shattered, the once cheerful storefront now pockmarked with bullet holes. Shell casings glinted on the blood-splattered sidewalk. Jake shoved through the crowd of onlookers, his heart in his throat. EMTs were wheeling out gurneys, sheets draped over ominously still forms. Uniformed officers were struggling to hold back the crowd and cordon off the scene. Inside, it was worse. Overturned tables, smashed glass, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood. And on the floor, sprawled in a spreading pool of crimson, Clara. Jake dropped to his knees beside the fallen woman, cradling her limp form. No, please no. But it was too late. The vibrant, courageous woman who had risked everything to build a new life was gone, her eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. A strangled sob drew Jake's eyes to the back corner. There, huddled behind the counter, were Clara's two young children, their faces streaked with tears and terror. In an instant, Jake understood the ruthless calculus of Viper's revenge. He hadn't just targeted Jake's informant. He had waited until her children were there. He had wanted them to witness their mother's murder. A cold, terrible rage settled over Jake, unlike anything he had ever known. He had seen cruelty and violence before, but this went beyond all rhyme or reason. This was evil in its purest form. He rose slowly, fists clenched at his sides. He could feel Shadow's hackles rising in response to his fury, a low, continuous growl rumbling from the dog's throat. This ends now, Jake whispered. I don't care what it takes. I don't care how far I have to go. Viper doesn't get to walk away from this. He turned to face his fellow officers, his eyes burning with righteous wrath. For once, no one dared argue with him. They had all seen the depravity of this crime. We take him down, Jake declared, his voice ringing with grim purpose. We take them all down. No more half measures. No more playing by the rules they mock. It's time we finish this. Over the next few days, a change came over the city. It was subtle at first, a slight hesitation in the swagger of gang members on the street, a few more people willing to meet a cop's eyes and nod a greeting. But it grew steadily, whispers of hope mingling with long-held fears. On the streets, Jake and Shadow were a constant presence, questioning, cajoling, pressuring. They leaned on every informant, chased down every lead. Sleep became a distant memory, food an afterthought. But it was working. Bit by bit, piece by piece, Viper's iron grip on the city was beginning to crack. There were mysterious raids on Los Vibores stash houses. Key players picked up on long-forgotten warrants. The gang's revenue streams were drying up, its influence waning. And at every turn, the people were there. A midnight tip slipped under a door. An anonymous envelope of incriminating photos. The owner of a torched business agreed to testify. Slowly, tentatively, the community was beginning to turn against their oppressors. But Viper was far from beaten. Enraged by the dismantling of his empire, he lashed out with increasing brutality. Drive-by shootings, indiscriminate beatings, a bombing at a community center. He didn't care about profit anymore. This was about punishment now, about teaching the city a lesson it would never forget. Through it all, Jake and Shadow stood firm, a bulwark against the rising tide of violence. They mourned the innocence lost, the scars inflicted on their city, but they did not bend. They could not. Too much depended on them now. And so they pushed forward, step by blood-soaked step, driven by a singular, all-consuming goal: to see Viper brought to justice, no matter the cost. Even if it killed them. The break, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. A low-level runner, picked up on a routine corner sweep, offered a nugget of intel in exchange for leniency. Viper, he revealed, was holed up in an abandoned warehouse by the docks, directing his crumbling operation from behind a phalanx of armed guards. The location made sense: isolated, defensible, with easy access to the waterfront for bringing in illicit shipments. Jake pored over the plans with his assembled task force, a ragtag mix of cops, feds, and a few trusted community leaders. They all knew the risks. Viper would be expecting an assault, and he would be ready for war. But they also knew this was their chance. The one slim window to cut off the snake's head and end his reign of terror once and for all. They made their preparations with grim determination. Blueprints of the site were scrutinized, approach routes debated. Every contingency was planned for, every scenario rehearsed. They would likely only get one shot at this. They had to make it count. The night before the raid, Jake found himself at Clara's grave, Shadow at his side. He knelt, laying a single white rose on the freshly turned earth. "We're almost there, Clara," he whispered. "One more push, one more fight, and then maybe this city can start to heal. Start to be the place you always believed it could be." He felt a wet nose nudge his hand and looked down to see Shadow gazing up at him, dark eyes filled with unwavering loyalty and resolve. Jake managed a small smile. "You ready for this, boy?" he asked softly. "Because I gotta tell you, I'm pretty damn terrified of myself. We're about to kick the hornet's nest, but good." Shadow just leaned into him, warm and solid, and Jake drew strength from his steadfast presence. They had been through hell together, had seen. The pre-dawn darkness was shattered by the roar of engines and the squeal of tires as the task force converged on the waterfront. Heavily armed officers in tactical gear streamed from unmarked vans, moving with practiced efficiency to surround the warehouse. Jake was at the tip of the spear, Shadow prowling at his side, hackles raised and teeth bared. The air crackled with tension, every nerve straining, every sense on high alert. At Jake's signal, they burst through the doors, flashbangs and smoke grenades leading the way. Instantly, the cavernous space erupted in gunfire, muzzle flashes strobing in the gloom. Viper's men were dug in deep, pouring fire from elevated walkways and improvised barricades. But the task force had planned for this. They split into pre-assigned teams, leapfrogging forward under covering fire. Jake wove through the chaos, Shadow close at his heels. Their objective was clear: find Viper and end this, once and for all. But even amidst the cacophony of battle, Jake's heart ached for the officers he knew would likely fall today. Good men and women, putting their lives on the line to reclaim their city. Suddenly, a searing pain ripped through Jake's shoulder, sending him staggering. A sniper on the catwalk had found his mark. Jake hit the ground hard, feeling hot blood seeping through his fingers. Shadow was there instantly, standing over him, snarling at the unseen threat. Gritting his teeth, Jake forced himself back to his feet. He couldn't stop now, not when they were so close. He pressed forward, letting the adrenaline carry him, his vision narrowing to a single unwavering point. Viper. It all ended with him. They found him in a fortified back office, his few remaining loyalists arrayed in a last-ditch defense. Viper himself had a gun in his hand and madness in his eyes, spitting curses and threats. "You think you've won, Lawson?" he raved, even as the task force moved in, weapons trained. "Do you think this changes anything? I'll be back on the streets in a day. This is my city." Jake stepped forward, his gun level and steady despite the fire in his shoulder. "No, Viper," he said, his voice ringing with quiet conviction. "This is our city, and you'll never lay claim to it again." Viper's eyes darted wildly, seeking some avenue of escape, but there was none. He was surrounded, outgunned, and out of options. With a snarl of rage, he raised his weapon, determined to go down fighting. He never got the chance. Before he could even fully level his gun, Shadow launched himself across the room in a blur of fur and fury. The dog's jaws clamped down on Viper's arm, the crunch of bone mingling with the gang lord's scream of pain. The gun clattered to the floor and Viper fell, writhing and cursing as Shadow pinned him down, fangs bared inches from his throat. The remaining Viboris, seeing their leader fallen, threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. It was over. After years of terror, of death and degradation, the city's nightmare was finally at an end. As the task force moved in to secure the prisoners, Jake sank to the ground, his strength spent. Shadow was there instantly, whining in concern, licking at his sweat and blood-streaked face. "We did it, boy," Jake whispered, wrapping his arms around the dog's sturdy frame. "We really did it." And as the first rays of dawn began to pierce the warehouse's grimy windows, Jake felt the first stirrings of something he had almost forgotten: hope. Hope for his city, for his fellow officers, for all the lives Viper had blighted. The battle was won. Now the true work could begin, the work of healing, of rebuilding, of forging a new path forward. It wouldn't be easy. The scars run deep, the wounds still raw and bleeding. But for the first time in a long, long time, Jake dared to believe it was possible. The city celebrated, a cathartic outpouring of joy and relief. Impromptu block parties sprung up, people laughing and dancing in the streets, sharing food and stories. The fear that had shadowed every interaction, every public gathering, began to recede. Viper's fall sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. His empire shattered, his myth of invincibility broken. Other gangs, once eager to fill the power vacuum, now looked over their shoulders nervously, wondering if they would be next. Jake found himself at the center of a media maelstrom, reporters clamoring for interviews, TV pundits debating the implications of the takedown. He bore it all with quiet grace, shrugging off praise, insisting he was just a small part of a much larger effort. But the city knew better. They had seen Jake and Shadow's tireless work firsthand. The late-night patrols, the harrowing raids, the dogged investigations. In a world where heroes are often disappointed, Jake was the real deal. A man who had stared down evil and never blinked. Amidst the tumult, Jake made a point to attend every funeral for the fallen, both cops and civilians. He met with their families, shared stories, and shouldered their grief. It was a solemn reminder of the price that had been paid, the lives lost in the long twilight struggle. But there were other reminders too, green shoots of hope springing from the rubble. Clara's bakery reopened, her sister taking up the mantle. The community center that had been bombed held a groundbreaking ceremony for its rebuilding. More and more people came forward to report crimes, to testify in court, confident now that their voices would be heard and protected. Change was coming to the city, slow, painful, hard-fought change. And though the road ahead was long, Jake finally allowed himself to believe that a better future was possible. A year to the day after the raid, Jake found himself back at Clara's grave, a place that had become a regular pilgrimage. Shadow, ever faithful, leaned against his leg, a warm, steady presence. So much had changed in that year. The police department, once riddled with corruption and apathy, was undergoing a top-to-bottom overhaul. New training, new oversight, a new commitment to community policing. It was a slow, sometimes contentious process, but progress was being made. The gangs, though not eradicated, had been largely driven underground. New economic development initiatives were bringing jobs and opportunity to long-neglected neighborhoods. Schools and community programs, once starved for resources, were beginning to thrive. And the people, the long-suffering, unbreakable people of the city, were beginning to chart their own course. Neighborhood watches, community gardens, youth mentorship programs, grassroots efforts to build the city they wanted to see. Jake knelt by Clara's headstone, his hand resting on Shadow's broad head. "We're getting there, Clara," he murmured. "Step by step, day by day. It's still hard. There's still so much work to do. But you'd be proud of this city, proud of how far we've come." He took a deep breath, letting the peace of the moment settle over him. For so long, his life had been defined by the fight, by the constant, grinding struggle against the darkness. But now, with each passing day, he could feel a new purpose taking shape. No longer just a warrior, but a guardian, a builder, a man who could help guide his city into a brighter tomorrow. He rose, Shadow coming to alert at his side. There was work to be done, a future to forge, and he would be there every step of the way, for his city, for his people, for the hope that refused to die. The sun was setting over the city skyline, bathing the streets in a warm, golden glow. In a once-neglected park, now vibrant with new playgrounds and community gardens, a crowd had gathered. They were there to honor the man who had become the living embodiment of the city's resilience. The man who, in their darkest hour, had been their beacon of hope. Jake stood at the podium, humbled and more than a little uncomfortable with the attention. Shadow sat dutifully at his side, ever the stalwart companion. "I'm not a hero," Jake began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "The real heroes are all of you, the people of this city who never lost faith, who never stopped fighting for something better." He looked out over the sea of faces, seeing in them the scars of the past, but also the determination of the present, the dreams of the future. "We've come far," he said, "further than many thought possible. But the journey isn't over. It's only just beginning. There will be more challenges ahead, more obstacles to overcome. But I look at all of you, and I know in my heart that we will meet them, together." His gaze settled on a group of children near the front, their eyes wide and shining with something that looked eerily like hope. "To the young people here today," he said, his voice softening, "this city belongs to you now. You are its future. Cherish it, protect it, make it better than it was before." As the applause washed over him, Jake looked down at Shadow, at the dog who had been with him through it all, the battles and the triumphs, the deepest despair and the most shining moments of hope. "We did good, boy," he whispered, kneeling to wrap his arms around the noble animal. "We did good." And he knew with a bone-deep certainty that no matter what the future held, they would face it as they always had, together, unafraid, guardians of the city's tomorrow.